Chapter 13. Rescue Operations. The afternoon sun was slanting through Eleanor's apartment windows by the time she returned home, casting long shadows across her precisely arranged furniture. She moved mechanically through her entry routine, keys in the ceramic dish by the door, shoes aligned on the designated mat, bag placed on the entryway table. The historical designation document spilled partially from her bag, a silent reminder of a battle she now believed lost before it had truly begun. Outside her windows, the city continued its relentless rhythm, oblivious to the emotional turmoil of one unemployed lawyer facing an impossible choice. Peanut followed her inside, his usual enthusiastic greetings subdued, as if sensing her distress. Eleanor barely registered his presence, moving through her apartment with the detached efficiency of someone operating on autopilot. She went straight to her bedroom, shedding her professional armor, the blazer, the carefully selected blouse, the precise accessories that projected competence and control. Without these external signifiers of the person she had constructed herself to be, Eleanor felt strangely exposed. Vulnerable in ways that had nothing to do with physical nakedness and everything to do with the identity crisis now fully blooming within her. She sat on the edge of her bed, the careful hospital corners still pristine from her morning routine. The routine that had once provided comfort through structure now felt like empty ritual, devoid of meaning beyond habit. Something broke inside her then. A dam holding back emotions she'd carefully managed through professional distance and strategic calculation. A sob escaped, raw and unexpected, followed by another and another, until Eleanor found herself curled on her perfectly made bed, shoulders shaking with the force of feelings she could no longer compartmentalize or control. Images flashed through her mind in relentless sequence. The yellow bulldozers assembling on Monroe Street, the defeat in Leo's posture as he discussed inventory liquidation, the quiet resignation of the baker whose family legacy would soon be reduced to rubble. And beneath these immediate wounds, older injuries resurfaced. Her mother's death, her father's conditional approval, always tied to professional achievement, the gradual narrowing of her life until success meant only one thing: security purchased at the cost of authentic connection. Eleanor cried with the abandoned intensity of someone who had denied herself this release for too long, who had maintained composure through determination rather than genuine resolution. She cried for the neighborhood facing destruction, for Leo preparing to dismantle his carefully created sanctuary, for her own complicity in prioritizing safety over meaning. But mostly, she cried for the possibility that now seemed lost, the chance to become someone different than the person she had constructed herself to be. Someone who measured success not just in professional achievements, but in connection, in purpose, in alignment between actions and deeper values. When the storm finally passed, leaving Eleanor hollow and exhausted, she raised herself to sitting position, wiping tears from her face with mechanical precision. The silence of her apartment pressed against her, emphasizing its careful sterility, its absence of the comfortable chaos that characterized Leo's bookstore.
"Peanut?"
She called for the dachshund, suddenly needing his warm presence, his stubborn independence that had gradually softened her own rigid patterns. No clicking of nails on hardwood answered her summons. No indignant snuffle from his bed in the corner.
"Peanut, where are you?"
Rising from the bed, Eleanor moved through her apartment with increasing urgency, checking Peanut's usual hiding spots: under the dining table, behind the sofa, in the laundry basket he sometimes claimed despite her repeated prohibitions. No dachshund. A new fear bloomed alongside her emotional exhaustion. She retraced her steps from the apartment entry, trying to remember if she'd seen Peanut come inside. Had she been so absorbed in her own distress that she'd left the door open? Had she failed to notice him slipping past her in the fog of her tumultuous thoughts?
Peanut!
Her voice carried a note of panic now as she threw open her apartment door, scanning the empty hallway. The dachshund's escape artist tendencies had been a running joke between her and Leo, but there was nothing humorous about the thought of him loose in the city, navigating traffic and dangers he was too stubborn to recognize as threats. Eleanor rushed back inside, grabbing her keys from their designated dish. She needed to search outside immediately, needed to find her small companion before he wandered too far, before the setting sun made the search even more difficult. In her haste, she left her phone on the entryway table, the device silently receiving a call she wouldn't hear. Leo stood outside Cornerstone Books, Peanut's leash looped around his wrist as the dachshund investigated nearby sidewalk scents with enthusiastic dedication. Apollo sat beside them, his blue eyes tracking each pedestrian with careful assessment, as if helping search for the dog's missing owner. Leo checked his phone again. The third call to Eleanor's number had gone straight to voicemail, just like the previous attempts. His message had been simple. Eleanor, it's Leo. Peanut somehow found his way to the bookstore. He's safe with me and Apollo. Call when you get this. But that had been 20 minutes ago, and no response had come. Concern was gradually replacing confusion. It wasn't like Eleanor to be separated from her phone, to be unreachable in this age of constant connectivity, and it definitely wasn't like her to be unaware of Peanut's whereabouts, given her careful monitoring of the dachshund's activities.
What do you think, Apollo? Should we wait here or try to find her?
The husky tilted his head in apparent consideration of this important question.
Fair point. She's probably worried sick.
Leo glanced at the bookstore, where he'd been mechanically cataloging inventory for potential liquidation before Peanut's unexpected arrival. The dachshund had simply appeared at the door, scratching insistently until Leo had opened it, as if fulfilling a mission of vital importance. Perhaps he had been. Making a decision, Leo quickly scribbled a note on bookstore stationery. Eleanor. Peanut found his way to Cornerstone. He's safe with Apollo and me. We're looking for you. Leo. He taped it securely to the door before gathering the dog's leashes and heading in the direction of Eleanor's apartment. The construction equipment still lined Monroe Street, yellow machines now silent as workers departed for the day. Tomorrow they would begin dismantling the already purchased buildings, creating space for Richard's luxury development. The physical manifestation of a battle Leo had calculated as lost, of a resistance he'd decided to abandon in favor of practical surrender. As he walked, the dachshund trotting deliberately ahead as if guiding their journey, Leo found himself questioning the resignation that had settled over him during the meeting at the cafe. Had he been too quick to accept defeat? Too ready to calculate losses rather than fight for what mattered? The answer emerged with uncomfortable clarity. His surrender had begun not with Richard's construction equipment, but with Eleanor's potential acceptance of the firm position. If she, who had worked so closely with him on the historical designation, who had shared intimacy and connection beyond professional collaboration, could be swayed by Richard's tactics, what hope did they have of ultimate victory? But perhaps that calculation itself revealed a deeper truth. Perhaps his readiness to surrender the bookstore was less about practical assessment and more about emotional protection. If he anticipated loss, prepared for it, controlled its narrative, then the pain might be managed, contained within acceptable parameters. Control through anticipation. Wasn't that exactly what he'd recognized in Eleanor? What he'd gently teased her about even as he found himself drawn to her precise mind, her careful analysis, her structured approach to an uncertain world?
Looks like we have more in common than I realized.
The quiet observation was directed at Peanut, who glanced back as if understanding perfectly. Apollo huffed what might have been agreement, his pace steady beside his human companion. They were approaching the block where Eleanor's apartment building stood when Peanut suddenly stiffened, nose raised to test the air. A familiar posture that Leo recognized from their park encounters. The dachshund had detected something of profound interest, likely small and furry. Before Leo could tighten his grip on the leash, Peanut lunged forward with surprising strength, the thin strap slipping from Leo's fingers as the dachshund shot toward a narrow alleyway between buildings. His small body disappeared into the shadows with remarkable speed for such short legs.
Peanut, no.
Leo broke into a run, Apollo matching his pace with canine enthusiasm for unexpected pursuit. They reached the alley entrance in time to see Peanut squeeze through a broken basement window in the building on the left, a structure Leo recognized as one of those already purchased by Kincaid Partners, scheduled for demolition in the coming days.
Of course, perfect timing as always.
The building appeared vacant, windows boarded on upper floors, faded no trespassing signs affixed to doors long since secured against entry. But the basement window Peanut had disappeared through offered a gap just large enough for a determined dachshund to access. Leo assessed the situation with growing concern. The structure was slated for demolition, which meant utilities might already be disconnected, safety inspections abandoned, structural integrity possibly compromised by preliminary work. Not an ideal environment for a small dog with outsized hunting instincts and minimal self-preservation skills.
Apollo, stay. Guard this spot.
The husky sat immediately, his posture alert as he positioned himself beside the broken window. Leo secured Apollo's leash to a nearby pipe, ensuring the dog wouldn't follow him into potential danger. The window opening was too small for an adult human, but Leo spotted a service entrance further along the building's side. The padlock that once secured it hung broken. Whether from official preparation for demolition or unauthorized entry, he couldn't tell. Either way, it provided access to find Eleanor's wayward companion. Inside, the building was a study in abandonment. Dust-covered floors, walls bearing rectangular clean spots where fixtures had been removed, the musty scent of space long unoccupied by human presence. Weak sunlight filtered through dirt-encrusted windows, creating more shadows than illumination.
Peanut, where are you, buddy?
His voice echoed in the empty space, receiving no canine response. Leo moved carefully across what appeared to be a former commercial space, perhaps once a small office or shop, now stripped of any identifying features beyond basic architectural elements. A scuttling sound from below drew his attention. The basement, where the broken window had provided Peanut's entry point. Leo located a door leading to stairs, its surface covered with multiple warning signs about structural concerns and restricted access. Ignoring these official cautions, Leo descended carefully, each step accompanied by an ominous creak from ancient wood. The basement was considerably darker than the floor above, the only illumination coming from the broken window through which Peanut had entered, and a few narrow ground-level openings designed more for ventilation than light.
Peanut, come on, buddy. Eleanor's worried about you.
A distant scratching responded to his call, followed by a determined dachshund whine that experienced ears would recognize as frustration rather than distress. Following the sound, Leo navigated through the basement's maze of support columns and abandoned storage areas. He found Peanut in the farthest corner, front paws digging enthusiastically at a small hole in the aging foundation. The object of his attention, a mouse or rat, had apparently retreated into this sanctuary beyond the reach of even the most determined canine hunter.
Making friends with the locals, I see.
Peanut glanced back, momentarily acknowledging Leo's presence before returning to his excavation project with renewed vigor. Clearly, surrender was not in this dog's vocabulary, regardless of the practical impossibility of his objective. Leo crouched beside the dachshund, reaching slowly to secure the drag leash still attached to his collar. As his fingers closed around the strap, a deep groaning sound emanated from somewhere above them. followed by a shower of dust and small debris from the ceiling.
That's not encouraging.
Another groan, louder this time, accompanied by a distinct shift in the building's frame. Leo's concern transformed immediately to alarm as he recognized the sounds of structural stress, the protest of a building experiencing forces it wasn't designed to withstand. He scooped Peanut into his arms, the dachshund squirming in indignant protest at this interruption of his hunting activities. The dog's objections ceased abruptly as another, more profound shudder ran through the building, this one dislodging larger chunks of ceiling plaster that crashed to the floor around them.
Time to go, right now.
Holding Peanut securely against his chest, Leo moved toward the stairs with urgent purpose. The building's groaning had become continuous, a symphony of stressed materials that suggested imminent failure rather than gradual deterioration. They had just reached the staircase when part of the ceiling collapsed completely, blocking their path with fallen beams and debris. Leo turned immediately, searching for another exit route. The window Peanut had used was too small for a human carrying a dog, but there had to be another option. A service entrance, a coal chute, something designed for access beyond the now blocked stairs. Through the dust and growing darkness, Leo spotted what appeared to be doors set into the foundation wall, likely an old delivery entrance, now sealed but potentially navigable in emergency. As he moved toward this possible escape route, the floor beneath them gave a sickening lurch.
Hang on, buddy.
Peanut, seeming to finally grasp the seriousness of their situation, pressed closer against Leo's chest, all resistance abandoned in favor of partnership. Leo's progress across the increasingly unstable floor was deliberate but urgent, each step carefully placed while maintaining forward momentum. The foundation doors, when reached, presented their own challenge, secured from the outside with what appeared to be a heavy bar or lock. Leo placed his shoulder against the aging wood, applying pressure that under normal circumstances he would have considered unwise given the building's condition. But circumstances were far from normal, as evidenced by the continuing cacophony of structural failure surrounding them. Eleanor's search had taken her in widening circles from her apartment building, panic increasing with each street covered without sign of her wayward dachshund. The methodical grid pattern she'd initially employed had gradually dissolved into something more desperate and less strategic, her usual analytical approach abandoned in favor of raw emotional urgency.
Peanut, where are you?
Her voice had grown hoarse from calling, her professional composure completely abandoned in favor of genuine distress. This wasn't about a pet, a responsibility inherited from her mother. This was about the small companion who had gradually, stubbornly carved a place in her carefully ordered life, who had introduced unpredictability she'd initially resisted, but gradually come to value, who had, in his stubborn independence, helped prepare her for a similar quality in the bookstore owner she now couldn't stop thinking about. Leo. The thought surfaced with painful clarity. If anyone would know how to find a wayward dachshund, it would be the man who had tracked Apollo through the city multiple times, who understood canine psychology with the same insight he brought to human motivation. But calling him would require acknowledging their morning conversation, addressing the resignation in his voice when he'd discussed liquidating his bookstore, confronting the careful distance he'd established in anticipation of her betrayal. A betrayal she was still considering, if Richard's offer was measured by traditional metrics of professional success. Eleanor pushed the thought aside, focusing on the immediate crisis. She needed to find Peanut. Everything else, job offers, neighborhood preservation, complicated feelings for rumpled bookstore owners, could wait until her small companion was safely home. Her search path had brought her to Monroe Street, where the now silent construction equipment stood in ominous formation. Yellow machines awaiting tomorrow's destruction, the physical manifestation of Richard's confidence that resistance would ultimately crumble. A flash of movement caught Eleanor's attention. A dog, but not the one she sought. Larger, with distinctive markings visible even from a distance. A husky Eleanor would recognize anywhere.
Apollo?
The dog was alone, secured to a pipe alongside a building Eleanor recognized as one of those already purchased by Kincaid Partners. Apollo's ears perked at the sound of his name, his entire body tensing with what appeared to be recognition and relief at her approach.
What are you doing here? Where's...
She didn't complete the question, attention captured by the broken window beside which Apollo stood sentinel. Understanding dawned with terrible clarity. If Apollo was here, Leo couldn't be far. And if both were positioned outside this particular building, with no sign of either man or dachshund, a low, ominous groan emanated from the structure, the sound of materials under stress reaching critical failure points. Apollo whined, pulling at his restraint, gaze fixed on the broken window with unmistakable canine anxiety.
Leo... Peanut?
No response came, but another louder groan issued from the building, accompanied by the distinct sound of something substantial collapsing within. Fear shot through Eleanor with physical force, all professional detachment abandoned in the face of immediate, visceral threat to those she cared about. Without conscious decision, she found herself moving toward the building's side entrance, where a broken padlock hung uselessly from a door already slightly ajar. Apollo's increasingly urgent barking provided soundtrack to her approach, the husky clearly distressed by whatever was happening inside.
Leo!
Her voice echoed in the dimly lit interior, receiving no human response. But a distant scratching reached her ears, followed by what might have been Peanut's distinctive bark, muffled by distance and intervening structure. The basement. They must be in the basement. Eleanor located the stairs, hesitating only briefly at the multiple warning signs before descending into increasing darkness. The building's groaning had become continuous, a symphony of stressed materials suggesting imminent failure rather than gradual deterioration. At the bottom of the stairs, she found her path blocked by fallen debris, ceiling materials and structural elements that had already collapsed. Beyond this obstacle, dust swirled in the minimal light, obscuring visibility while suggesting significant movement elsewhere in the space.
Leo, Peanut, are you down here?
Eleanor?
His voice came from beyond the debris field, strained but unmistakable. Relief flooded her system, immediately followed by renewed concern at the continuing sounds of structural distress surrounding them.
Where are you? Are you hurt?
We're okay for now, near the back wall. Trying to find a way out through some old delivery doors. Stairs are completely blocked.
Another substantial groan from the building punctuated his explanation, this one accompanied by visible movement in the walls, a rippling effect that suggested the entire structure was approaching catastrophic failure.
I'll find another way to you.
She began moving along the perimeter of the basement, staying close to foundation walls that might offer more stability than the increasingly uncertain floor. Her progress was cautious but determined, guided less by strategic calculation than by urgent need to reach the man and dog somewhere in this failing structure. Around a corner, through thinning dust, she finally spotted them. Leo pressed against what appeared to be double doors set into the foundation wall. Peanut clutched securely against his chest. The dachshund spotted her first, his bark of recognition alerting Leo to her approach.
Eleanor, what are you doing in here? It's not safe.
His voice came from beyond the debris field, strained but unmistakable. Through the swirling dust, Eleanor could just make out his figure. Leo pressed against what appeared to be double doors set into the foundation wall. Peanut clutched protectively against his chest. The dachshund barked in recognition, squirming in Leo's arms at the sight of his owner.
Leo, are you hurt? Is Peanut okay?
We're fine for now, but this whole place is coming down. The ceiling's already collapsed behind us.
As if to emphasize his point, another violent shudder ran through the building, sending a fresh shower of plaster and debris down between them. Eleanor instinctively stepped back as a support beam crashed to the floor, widening the gap that separated her from Leo and Peanut.
I can't get to you. The way is completely blocked now.
There's no time. The whole structure's failing. These doors lead outside, but they're secured from the other side. You need to go back the way you came and get around to this side of the building.
Eleanor hesitated, torn between the instinct to push forward toward them and the rational recognition that Leo was right. The debris field was now impassable, and the building's groans were intensifying with each passing second.
I'll find you. Just hold on.
She turned and raced back up the stairs, emerging into fading evening light just as another, more profound tremor shook the building. Apollo greeted her with anxious whining, still secured to the pipe, but straining toward the building with clear distress. His pulling caused the breakaway collar to snap, and Apollo trotted after Eleanor. Without hesitation, Eleanor ran around the perimeter of the structure, following the foundation wall, until she located what had to be the external side of the doors Leo had described. Heavy wooden doors set into the foundation, secured with a thick metal bar slotted into brackets on either side. A simple but effective system designed to prevent unauthorized entry.
Leo, I'm outside the doors. Can you hear me?
Eleanor, thank God. The bar's too heavy to lift from this angle. See if you can slide it up out of the brackets.
She grabbed the bar with both hands, straining against its weight. The metal was old and rusted, resisting her efforts to shift it upward. Through a small gap between the doors, she could see Leo's face, dust-covered but determined as he pressed against the interior side.
It's not budging. Stand back. I'm going to try to break through this section. It's already damaged.
Eleanor watched as Leo's shoulder rammed against the doors, specifically targeting a portion where the wood appeared rotted and weakened by decades of moisture. The impact created a splintering crack, widening the gap between the doors slightly but not enough to allow passage. Another, more violent shudder ran through the building. Inside, Leo stumbled as the floor shifted beneath him. Through the widening gap, Eleanor could see chunks of ceiling continuing to fall around him.
This isn't working fast enough.
He adjusted his grip on Peanut, moving closer to the damaged section of the door.
Take him. At least I can get Peanut out.
Before Eleanor could protest, Leo was already pushing the dachshund through the gap he'd created, just barely wide enough for a small dog to squeeze through. Peanut emerged into Eleanor's waiting hands, his body trembling but otherwise unharmed.
Leo, we need to get you out too.
She clutched Peanut to her chest with one hand, while the other continued to work at the bar, trying desperately to shift it from its brackets. Inside, Leo was still struggling with the doors, attempting to widen the gap enough for human passage. Another violent tremor, stronger than any before, shook the entire structure. Through the gap, Eleanor saw Leo stagger as the floor buckled beneath him.
Eleanor, get back. Now. The whole thing's going.
I'm not leaving you.
You have to. Get Peanut to safety. I'll find another way out.
Before she could argue further, Leo had already turned away, moving deeper into the basement in search of alternative escape routes. The gap between the doors offered a limited view of his retreating figure as he navigated through falling debris toward what might have been a window or other opening on the far side.
Go, now!
The command in his voice, the urgency behind it, finally broke through Eleanor's resistance. Clutching Peanut tightly against her chest, she backed away from the doors just as the most violent shudder yet convulsed through the building. The sound was deafening. Wood splintering, metal groaning, masonry crumbling as the structure began its catastrophic failure. Eleanor continued backing away, Apollo now beside her, all three retreating to what felt like safer distance as the building's lower level collapsed inward. Dust billowed from every opening, obscuring visibility as the structure settled into partial ruin.
Leo, Leo!
Her voice echoed against the settling debris, receiving no response. Peanut whined in her arms, sensing her distress even as he pressed closer for protection. Apollo gave a low, mournful howl beside them. The building had collapsed, and Leo had still been inside,
No, 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 no.
She sank to her knees on the sidewalk, still clutching Peanut to her chest, eyes fixed on the ruined structure before her. The carefully constructed professional armor she'd maintained for years shattered completely, emotion flooding her system with paralyzing force.
Leo, can you hear me? Leo!
Only silence answered her calls. Tears streamed unchecked down her face, all pretense of composed control abandoned in the face of this unimaginable loss. Not just a bookstore owner, not just a potential romantic interest, but a man who had risked everything to save a dog he didn't even own, who had stayed behind to ensure her safety and Peanut's, who had measured value beyond market assessment and success in meaning rather than status.
Please be okay.
Minutes passed, agonizing eternities during which Eleanor remained frozen in place, Peanut clutched against her chest, Apollo pressing against her side in canine solidarity. The dust gradually began to settle, revealing the extent of the building's collapse more clearly in the fading evening light.
Eleanor?
At first, she thought she'd imagined it, the mind's desperate fabrication of what the heart most wanted to hear. But Apollo's reaction, the sudden alert tension in his body, the sharp bark of recognition, suggested otherwise.
Eleanor, over here.
She turned toward the sound, hardly daring to hope. And there, emerging from around the far corner of the building, coated in dust but unmistakably alive, was Leo. He limped slightly, one arm held protectively against his side, but his eyes, when they found hers, were bright with relief and something deeper, more profound.
Leo!
She was on her feet in an instant, Peanut still secured in one arm as she ran toward him. Apollo raced ahead, greeting his human with ecstatic barking and joyful circling. Leo dropped to one knee, partly from apparent exhaustion, and partly to greet the husky with grateful recognition of his canine concern.
Found a window on the other side. Got out just before the main collapse.
Eleanor reached him, free arm wrapping around his shoulders with desperate relief. Peanut, sandwiched between them, barked his own welcome, tail whipping with such vigor his entire back end participated in the movement.
I thought you were...
She couldn't complete the sentence, the possibility still too raw despite the evidence of his survival before her. Leo's arm encircled her waist, drawing her closer despite the awkward presence of an enthusiastic dachshund between them.
Takes more than a collapsing building to keep me from an unfinished conversation with Eleanor Washington.
The gentle humor in his tone, the warmth beneath the dust-covered exterior, it all broke through whatever remaining emotional barriers Eleanor had maintained. Tears flowed freely, not from devastation now, but from overwhelming relief.
Hey, it's okay. We're all okay.
His hand moved to her face, thumb gently brushing away tears with unmistakable tenderness. The simple gesture, comfort offered without calculation or agenda, only intensified Eleanor's emotional response. This man had risked his life for her dog, had prioritized their safety above his own without hesitation or strategic assessment of personal benefit. All the qualities her carefully constructed professional identity had systematically devalued as impractical, inefficient, impossible to quantify on spreadsheets or resumes. They remained there for long moments, the four of them huddled together on the sidewalk, as the ruined building settled behind them. Apollo circled them protectively, occasionally pressing against Leo's side as if reassuring himself of his human's continued presence. Peanut apparently recovered from his ordeal, squirmed to be released from Eleanor's grip.
I think we've earned a moment of rest before the next crisis, buddy.
He helped Eleanor to her feet, his movements revealing a slight wince that suggested minor injuries sustained during his escape. Peanut immediately pressed against Eleanor's legs once set down, his entire body wiggling with what could only be described as dachshund joy at their collective reunion.
What happened? How did you end up in there?
Your adventurous companion showed up at the bookstore, apparently on an independent mission to reunite us. He spotted a mouse near that building and made a break for it before I could secure his leash properly.
He came to find you? At the bookstore?
Showed up scratching at the door like he owned the place. I tried calling you, but it kept going to voicemail.
Eleanor's hand moved automatically to her pocket, finding it empty of the device she now remembered leaving on her entryway table in her haste to search for Peanut.
I was so worried when I realized he was missing that I left without my phone.
Understandable. I left a note on your apartment door just in case you return there.
This practical consideration, this thinking of her potential worry even as he searched for her missing dog, struck Eleanor with unexpected force. The care implicit in that simple action, anticipating her concern, taking steps to alleviate it, revealed something essential about the man standing before her. Something that made Richard's professional offer, with all its financial security and status, suddenly seem hollow in comparison.
You risked your life for Peanut.
Well, he's very persuasive for someone with such short legs.
The deflecting humor couldn't disguise the simple truth of his actions. He had entered a structurally compromised building without hesitation to rescue a dog that wasn't even his. Had placed himself at genuine risk without calculating personal benefit or strategic advantage. Behind them, dust billowed from windows and doors as the building continued its partial collapse, a visual reminder of the danger they had narrowly escaped. The construction equipment stood in silent witness, yellow machines that would tomorrow continue the deliberate destruction Leo had just barely survived in its accidental form.
Thank you for finding him, for saving him.
We saved each other, I think.
He wasn't just talking about the building. The recognition flowed between them with quiet certainty, an acknowledgement of how their brief but intense connection had begun transforming both their lives in ways neither had anticipated. Eleanor looked at the man standing before her, dust-covered and disheveled, yet somehow more present, more real than anyone she'd encountered in years of professional networking and strategic relationship building. The man who had entered a collapsing building for a stubborn dachshund, who made transcendent coffee and philosophical jokes, who saw value beyond market assessment and measured success in meaning rather than status. And in that moment of clarity, Eleanor Washington made a decision that had nothing to do with careful analysis or strategic calculation. That emerged not from her professional identity, but from something more essential, more authentic than the persona she had constructed through years of external validation.
I'm not taking Richard's offer.
The words emerged with quiet certainty, surprising her with their unburdened clarity. No hesitation, no qualification, no strategic hedging. Just simple truth, spoken without calculation or fear. Leo studied her face, his expression shifting from surprise to something more complex, more hopeful.
Are you sure? It's everything you've been working toward.
No. It's everything I thought I should be working toward. Everything I was told constituted success.
She glanced down at Peanut, who had settled between them with unusual patience, as if recognizing the importance of this moment.
But I'm beginning to suspect that success might look different than I've been led to believe.
Different how?
Less about security through isolation and more about meaning through connection. Less about controlling outcomes and more about engaging with possibilities.
The words emerged without rehearsal, without the careful editing she typically applied to professional communication. Raw truth rather than strategic presentation. And in that unfiltered authenticity, Eleanor found unexpected freedom. The liberation of shedding armor she'd carried so long she'd forgotten it wasn't part of her actual self.
That sounds suspiciously like a Leo Bennett philosophy.
Maybe. Or maybe it's an Eleanor Washington realization that's been forming since a stubborn dachshund and an equally stubborn bookstore owner started disrupting my carefully constructed routines.
A small smile tugged at the corners of Leo's mouth, though caution remained in his eyes. Protection against hope too quickly embraced, against vulnerability too completely exposed.
What about the neighborhood, the bookstore? Richard's still going to move forward with demolition.
Maybe, if we surrender without a fight.
The shift in pronoun, from his battle to their shared cause, wasn't lost on either of them. Something had fundamentally changed, not just in Eleanor's professional calculations, but in her understanding of where she belonged in this unfolding drama.
The historical designation application is nearly complete. If we submit it tomorrow morning, it automatically triggers a review period during which no demolition permits can be issued.
But you said yourself that Richard has connections throughout city government, ways to expedite processes that should take months.
He does, but so do I.
This declaration, spoken with quiet confidence rather than bravado, drew Leo's full attention.
My former mentor at Columbia Law sits on the Historical Preservation Commission, the same commission that would review our application. I haven't called in that favor because I've been saving it for something that matters.
And this matters?
More than I realized until about 20 minutes ago.
She gestured toward the partially collapsed building, the yellow machines positioned for tomorrow's destruction, the neighborhood facing transformation from community to commodity.
This matters. The bookstore matters. What you've built there, the categories based on human experience rather than commercial convenience, the space that exists somehow adjacent to regular life where time moves differently, it matters in ways I'm only beginning to understand.
The words emerged without calculation, without strategic consideration of their impact or implications. Just raw truth, offered without armor or agenda. The kind of communication Eleanor had systematically eliminated from her professional interactions, considering it inefficient and potentially vulnerable. Yet in this moment of genuine expression, she found unexpected strength rather than weakness. A clarity that strategic calculation had never provided. Leo studied her face, searching for something beyond the words themselves. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him, because the caution in his expression gradually gave way to something warmer, more hopeful.
So what's the plan, counselor?
First, we finish the historical designation application tonight. File it first thing tomorrow morning with my mentor copied on all correspondence. Then we rally the neighborhood businesses to present a united front. No individual sales, collective resistance only.
The strategy formed as she spoke, her legal mind engaging with the problem not as abstract intellectual exercise, but as urgent protection of something that mattered. Something worth fighting for, beyond professional challenge or resume enhancement.
And Richard's offer? The position at his firm?
Let's just say I'll be drafting a very precisely worded decline letter tonight.
A smile spread across Leo's face, not the careful, measured expression he'd maintained during their cafe conversation, but something genuine and unguarded. The kind of smile that transforms features and reveals essential character beneath social performance.
I have excellent coffee to fuel late-night legal strategizing.
I was counting on that.
Apollo woofed softly, as if registering his approval of these developments. Peanut, not to be outdone, offered his own commentary in the form of an authoritative bark that seemed entirely disproportionate to his small stature.
The canine contingent appears supportive of this approach.
They've been conspiring toward this outcome from the beginning, I suspect.
The easy banter flowed between them, but beneath it ran something deeper, more meaningful, the recognition that something fundamental had shifted in both their lives. That the crisis they'd just survived had clarified priorities previously obscured by habit and expectation. Behind them, dust continued to settle around the partially collapsed building. Before them stood construction equipment positioned for destruction rather than creation. The physical manifestation of an opposition that had once seemed impossibly powerful, destined for inevitable victory. But in this moment, standing on a sidewalk with 2 dogs and 1 dust-covered bookstore owner who had risked his life for a stubborn dachshund, Eleanor Washington found herself free of the resignation that had settled over her that morning, free of the calculating surrender that had seemed the only rational response to superior resources and connected influence. Some things were worth fighting for, even against seemingly impossible odds. Some connections mattered more than security purchased through their sacrifice. Some definitions of success couldn't be measured in salary figures or partnership tracks, or external validation from sources that assessed value only in market terms. As they gathered their respective dogs and began walking toward Cornerstone Books to begin the night's work, Eleanor felt strangely, unexpectedly lighter, as if she'd set down armor carried so long she'd forgotten it wasn't part of her actual self. As if in choosing connection over security, meaning over status, possibility over predictability, she'd reclaimed something essential that had been gradually eroded by years of professional conditioning. The future remained uncertain, the battle against Richard's development plans far from guaranteed victory. But in this moment, walking beside a man who measured success in meaning rather than status, who had entered a collapsing building for a stubborn dachshund, Eleanor found herself embracing that uncertainty rather than resisting it. Not because she had suddenly transformed into someone who welcomed chaos, but because she had recognized something worth the risk of its potential cost. Something that mattered beyond careful calculation of professional advantage or strategic assessment of future security. Something she wasn't willing to surrender, even when rational analysis suggested it might be the safest course. Chapter 14. Cornerstone. The river glittered beneath a crisp October sun, autumn light transforming its surface into a mosaic of gold and amber. Eleanor Washington stood at the railing of the small balcony, coffee mug cradled in both hands, watching the play of light across the water. 3 months had passed since the night of collapsed buildings and life-altering decisions. 3 months of battles won and lost, of endings and unexpected beginnings. She took a sip of coffee, perfectly brewed as always, and let her gaze drift to the new sign hanging proudly across the street. Cornerstone Books and Community, its deep green lettering a deliberate echo of the original shop's design. The space below was still under renovation, workers visible through large windows as they installed the custom shelving Leo had designed. The store wouldn't open for another 2 weeks, but already it felt like home in a way Eleanor's meticulously decorated apartment never had. Behind her, the glass door to their shared apartment slid open, followed by the familiar pad of bare feet across the balcony's wooden planks. Warm arms encircled her waist as Leo's chin came to rest on her shoulder.
Professional brooding or recreational contemplation?
Neither. Strategic appreciation of our current coordinates.
She felt rather than saw his smile, the slight movement of his cheek against her temple as he tightened his embrace.
Spoken like a woman who's found her balance.
Eleanor leaned back against him, allowing herself to fully inhabit this moment of quiet connection. The ability to simply be present, without mental calculations of time efficiency or opportunity cost, remained her most challenging and rewarding evolution.
We're going to be late.
Fashionably so. The non-profit legal world operates on a more humane schedule than corporate law.
Tell that to Mrs. Alvarez, who's been waiting 3 months for her landlord to fix her heating before winter sets in.
Point taken, counselor.
He pressed a kiss to her temple before releasing her, moving to lean against the railing beside her. The morning light caught in his perpetually disheveled hair, illuminating strands of gold among the brown. 3 months of shared life had done nothing to diminish the little flutter Eleanor felt at these casual moments of proximity.
How are you feeling about today? The grand unveiling of Washington Community Legal Advocates deserves at least minor emotional acknowledgement.
I'm feeling everything, I think. Excited, terrified, certain, doubtful. The full emotional spectrum before 8 a.m.
Efficient as always.
She smiled, acknowledging the gentle teasing for what it was. Appreciation rather than criticism of her naturally systematic approach to life. The past months had taught her that her organizational skills weren't flaws to overcome, but strengths to channel toward purposes that mattered.
The office space is still half furnished. The case management software isn't fully configured, and our funding only guarantees operations for 18 months.
All true.
But we already have 27 active cases. People who would otherwise face corporate attorneys or navigating the system alone.
Also true.
Eleanor took another sip of her coffee, considering the precarious balance of her new professional reality. Washington Community Legal Advocates, WCLA as it was already known to the neighborhood residents it served, had emerged from the ashes of their failed battle to save Monroe Street. The historical designation application had been filed, her mentor had intervened, but Richard Kincaid's connections had proven too powerful, his resources too vast to overcome through legal maneuvering alone. The bulldozers had come, just as he'd promised. Cornerstone Books, the flower shop, the bakery, Diane's cafe, all reduced to rubble to make way for luxury condominiums and high-end retail space. A defeat that had felt crushing in the moment, but had somehow catalyzed something unexpected in its aftermath.
I never thought losing would feel like this.
Like what?
Like opening, like possibility rather than conclusion.
Leo's fingers found hers on the railing, intertwining with the easy intimacy that had developed between them. His thumb traced gentle circles against her skin, the simple point of connection grounding her present, while her mind cataloged the unexpected journey of the past 3 months.
You redirected rather than retreated. It's what makes you exceptional, whether you're wearing corporate armor or nonprofit dedication.
She turned to study his face, finding nothing but genuine appreciation in his expression. No calculation, no agenda, no careful strategizing for maximum impact. Just Leo, offering perspective without pressure, insight without expectation.
Richard called yesterday.
Hence the early morning brooding.
Contemplation.
My apologies. Early morning strategic contemplation.
Eleanor found herself smiling despite the complicated emotions Richard's call had triggered. The ease between them, the gentle humor, the shared language that had developed, provided steady ground beneath the shifting terrain of their still evolving lives.
He offered me a position again. Chief Counsel for Kincaid Community Development Foundation. Double the salary of my previous offer. Complete autonomy over which projects receive legal support.
Impressive countermove. Richard always had excellent strategic instincts.
His tone remained neutral, offering neither judgment nor directive. This, too, had been Eleanor's most unexpected discovery. Leo's unwavering support of her autonomy, his absolute trust in her ability to make her own decisions without manipulation or subtle pressure.
It's a genuine offer. The foundation's legitimate, despite being funded by the same profit machine that demolished our neighborhood.
What did you tell him?
That I appreciated the offer, but was committed to my current path.
Something shifted in Leo's expression. A subtle softening around the eyes, a release of tension she hadn't realized he was carrying. For all his outward confidence, for all his philosophical embrace of uncertainty, he still harbored his own vulnerabilities.
A path that includes a half-furnished office and precarious funding?
A path that feels authentic in ways that Richard's offer, however generous, does not.
The simple truth resonated between them. 3 months ago, such a statement would have seemed foreign to Eleanor's carefully constructed professional identity. Now it emerged without calculation or strategic consideration, just honest recognition of how fundamentally her metric for success had evolved. Inside their apartment, the familiar click of dog nails against hardwood announced canine stirrings. Moments later, the balcony door slid open wider as Peanut pushed through with his characteristic determination, Apollo following with more dignity, but equal enthusiasm for morning companionship.
The supervisory committee has arrived to ensure proper start-of-day procedures.
Peanut immediately pressed against Eleanor's legs, his entire body wiggling in greeting despite seeing her less than an hour earlier. Apollo settled more sedately beside Leo, though his tail swept the balcony floor with unmistakable happiness.
We should go soon. Maggie's meeting me at the office to help arrange the client waiting area.
And I promised Marcus I'd help install the new display cases at the flower shop.
The mention of Marcus brought a different kind of warmth to Eleanor's chest. The flower shop owner had been the first to rebuild, using his above-market value payout from Richard to secure a new location just 2 blocks from the river. The baker had followed soon after, and even Diane had found space for a smaller version of her cafe connected to the new Cornerstone Books and Community location. Not a complete victory, not a perfect restoration, but something resilient and unexpectedly hopeful emerging from what had initially seemed devastating loss.
Walk together to the corner?
The 21st version of that question, and my answer remains unchanged.
Inside, the morning routine unfolded with practiced efficiency. Dogs fed, travel mugs filled with coffee, briefcases and messenger bags collected from their designated hooks by the door. What once would have been Eleanor's solo military precision preparation had evolved into a coordinated dance between 2 people and 2 dogs, each adapting to the other's rhythms with occasional missteps, but increasing harmony. The apartment itself reflected this evolution, Eleanor's minimalist organization softened by Leo's more eclectic approach. Law books shared shelves with poetry collections. Precisely arranged kitchen tools coexisted with mismatched mugs collected from bookshops around the country. Peanut's bed stationed with geometric precision beside Apollo's more casually positioned cushion. Not perfect concordance, but complementary counterpoint, each enhancing rather than diminishing the other. On the sidewalk outside their building, the neighborhood was coming fully to life. Morning commuters heading toward the transit station, shopkeepers raising awnings, dog walkers navigating familiar routes. Many nodded in greeting as Eleanor and Leo passed, some calling them by name with the easy familiarity of community recognition.
Remember when I couldn't imagine living anywhere but my perfectly silent apartment?
You mean the sterile museum exhibit formerly known as your living space?
It wasn't that bad.
Eleanor, you had exactly 4 coffee mugs, all identical, arranged at precise right angles in the cabinet.
Efficient design reduces decision fatigue.
And yet you've survived 3 months of my chaotic mug collection without noticeable cognitive decline.
She bumped her shoulder against his, the playful contact acknowledging his point without requiring verbal concession. This, too, had developed between them, physical communication that supplemented their verbal exchanges, adding layers of meaning through simple touch. They approached the corner where their paths would diverge, Eleanor heading toward the converted warehouse that now housed Washington community legal advocates, Leo toward the Riverside Retail District, where Marcus's new flower shop and the upcoming bookstore stood. Apollo and Peanut sat automatically, recognizing this daily juncture where their human companions would temporarily separate.
Tonight, dinner with Diane and the baker. Millie, you remembered her name, right? At 7.
I have appointments until 6, but I should make it. Unless Mrs. Alvarez's landlord requires additional persuasion.
The notorious Washington glare usually accelerates compliance.
A valuable professional skill honed through years of practice.
He leaned forward, brushing his lips against hers in what should have been a casual goodbye, but still somehow sent a current of awareness through Eleanor's system. 3 months, and the simple contact still created that flutter beneath her ribs, that moment of connection that transcended the purely physical.
Go forth and terrify oppressors with your precisely worded legal arguments.
Try not to alphabetize books by color before the shelves are actually installed.
With one more quick kiss, they separated, each with their respective dog, heading toward the lives they were building in this new neighborhood. Eleanor watched Leo for a moment as he walked away, struck once again by how the sight of his retreating figure no longer triggered anxiety about potential loss, but appreciation for temporary distance that would make reconnection all the sweeter. Washington Community Legal Advocates occupied the 2nd floor of a converted warehouse, its industrial windows flooding the space with natural light that reflected off the original brick walls. When Eleanor pushed open the glass doors, Peanut trotting importantly at her heels, she found the office already humming with activity despite the early hour.
There she is, the legal avenger herself.
Maggie Chen emerged from the small kitchen area, carrying a box labeled coffee supplies in her characteristic bold handwriting. Despite working overnight shifts at the hospital, she'd somehow managed to arrive before Eleanor, her energy seemingly undiminished by lack of sleep.
Avenger implies spandex and questionable physics. I prefer reasonably caffeinated advocate for equitable application of existing regulations.
Doesn't roll off the tongue quite as heroically.
Eleanor set her briefcase on the reception desk, taking in the space that still felt somewhere between vision and reality. The conference room was fully furnished, as were the 3 private offices, but the reception area remained a work in progress, folding chairs temporarily standing in for the still back-ordered waiting room furniture.
The plants arrived, and the art for the walls, and I convinced that carpenter friend of Miguel's to build a custom play area for kids waiting while their parents meet with you.
You've been here since when exactly?
5:30, maybe 6. Post-shift adrenaline is better channeled into productive activity than staring at my ceiling.
As they spoke, 2 more people entered the office. James Collins, the recent law school graduate Eleanor had hired as WCLA's first associate attorney, and Maria Santiago, their paralegal and office manager who had previously worked at Hargrove before following Eleanor into this new venture.
Morning, Eleanor. The Ramirez file is updated with yesterday's motion responses. Judge Winters wants our reply by Thursday.
And Mrs. Alvarez called. Her landlord suddenly discovered urgency when the city inspector confirmed our complaint. Heating repair scheduled for today.
Eleanor took in this information with a nod, the familiar rhythm of legal practice settling her into professional focus. Different context, different clients, but the same methodical approach to problem solving that had always characterized her work.
The Martinez family. Any word on their eviction stay?
Granted yesterday afternoon. They have 60 days to relocate, and the management company has to pay relocation costs as outlined in the Tenant Protection Ordinance they tried to ignore.
A small victory, but one that would make real difference in the lives of an actual family. Not theoretical shareholder value or abstract corporate interests, but tangible impact for people with names and faces and stories Eleanor now knew personally.
We're also getting calls about the new development. People in the buildings adjacent to Monroe Street are already receiving buyout offers.
Richard moving faster than expected.
His success with the first block has emboldened them. Word is they're planning to expand the luxury development by at least 3 additional blocks.
The information landed with familiar weight, the recognition that their initial defeat might be just the beginning of a larger pattern of neighborhood transformation, of communities displaced in service of profit, of spaces that mattered to people who actually lived there, sacrificed for the temporary residence of those who could afford premium amenities.
Speaking of the devil's expensive suit collection, what did he want yesterday?
Eleanor looked up sharply, momentarily surprised by Maggie's knowledge of Richard's call, before remembering their conversation at dinner the previous evening.
To offer me a position running his community foundation's legal department. Double my previous offer, complete autonomy, impressive benefits package.
The office fell silent, all eyes turning toward her with expressions ranging from concern to curiosity. The unspoken question hung in the air. Would she abandon this fledgling nonprofit for the security and status of Richard's high-profile foundation?
I declined.
Was there ever any actual doubt?
3 months ago? Absolutely.
The simple honesty of her response silenced even Maggie's ready quip. Eleanor moved toward her office, Peanut following with the dignified trot he adopted in professional settings, as if aware his behavior reflected on his human's reputation.
Maria, can you pull together everything we have on tenant rights in adjacent neighborhoods? I want to get ahead of Richard's expansion before people start accepting lowball offers out of fear or misinformation.
Already started a file. James has been researching precedents for community benefit requirements when developments expand beyond their original scope.
We might not be able to stop the development entirely, but we could potentially force significant concessions for existing residents.
Eleanor paused in her office doorway, struck by the initiative her small team had already taken without explicit direction. At Hargrove, associates waited for partner instructions. Paralegal activity was carefully prescribed, every action measured against billable hours and hierarchical approval. Here, shared purpose had created something different, collaborative momentum toward common goals, rather than carefully managed individual contributions to partner-directed outcomes.
We'll set up community information sessions, partner with the neighborhood association, make sure residents understand their rights before signing anything.
Fighting the good fight, one accurately interpreted regulation at a time. Very on brand for you.
Despite the teasing delivery, genuine pride shone in Maggie's expression. She, more than anyone, had witnessed Eleanor's evolution from corporate lawyer focused on professional advancement to community advocate channeling her considerable skills toward protection of those with less power and fewer resources.
It's what we're here for.
She entered her office, setting her briefcase on the desk as Peanut settled into his designated bed in the corner. Unlike her former office at Hargrove, with its carefully curated professional decor and strategic absence of personal elements, this space reflected both her methodical organization and her newly acknowledged connections. Photos lined one shelf. Eleanor with Leo at the river, surrounded by dogs. The WCLA team at their unofficial opening celebration. Marcus cutting the ribbon at his new flower shop. Legal references occupied another wall, arranged with her characteristic precision, but interspersed with volumes Leo had suggested. Philosophy, community organizing, the history of urban development as social policy rather than mere economic activity. A knock at her open door drew Eleanor's attention from her silent inventory of the space.
First client is here, the Garcia family, facing rent increase after complaining about code violations.
Show them to the conference room. I'll be right there.
As James departed, Eleanor took a moment to center herself. 3 months ago, she would have mentally calculated the potential billable hours, the strategic advantage of representing this client, the possible pathways to partner impression. Now she simply reviewed the case details, considering how best to help this specific family navigate a system deliberately designed to be inaccessible to those without resources or specialized knowledge. Peanut raised his head from his bed, offering what appeared to be canine encouragement before returning to his morning nap. Eleanor smiled at the dachshund's brief acknowledgement. This small companion who had, in his stubborn independence, helped prepare her for the larger changes that followed. She gathered her notes and moved toward the conference room, the familiar rhythm of legal practice settling around her like a well-worn garment. Different context, different purpose, but the same methodical approach that had always characterized her professional identity. Not abandoned, but redirected. Not diminished, but enhanced through meaningful application. Dusk had settled over the river by the time Eleanor left the office, painting the water in deepening shades of purple and blue. Peanut trotted beside her, his energy undimmed by a day spent observing client meetings and occasionally providing what Leo had dubbed emotional support dachshund services to anxious visitors. The autumn air carried a crisp edge that hinted at the approaching winter, prompting Eleanor to button her coat as they made their way toward the riverside development where Cornerstone Books and Community was nearing completion. Light spilled from the windows, illuminating the silhouettes of workers still finishing interior details despite the late hour. As she approached, the front door opened to reveal Leo deep in conversation with the contractor, gesturing toward the ceiling with characteristic animation. Apollo sat nearby, his dignified presence a stark contrast to Leo's enthusiastic movements. The husky spotted Eleanor first, his tail immediately beginning its rhythmic sweep against the floor. Leo followed the dog's gaze, his entire expression brightening when he saw her. Even after 3 months of shared life, that moment of recognition, the genuine pleasure that transformed his features at her approach, still created a flutter beneath Eleanor's ribs that no amount of logical analysis could fully explain.
The timing wizard arrives precisely when intended.
7 minutes late, actually.
But I factored in your tendency toward work absorption and adjusted expectations accordingly. Hence, precisely when intended.
The contractor excused himself with a knowing smile, leaving them standing in the bookstore's unfinished but rapidly materializing interior. Eleanor took in the space with fresh appreciation, the custom shelving now installed along the walls, the reading nooks positioned to catch natural light, the small stage area where Leo planned to host author events and children's readings. Different from the original Cornerstone books, yet carrying its essential spirit in thoughtful design and deliberate community focus.
It's really coming together.
Faster than expected. We might open next week instead of waiting the full 2.
He moved to her side, arm sliding naturally around her waist as if their bodies had developed their own gravitational pull toward each other. Peanut immediately trotted to Apollo, the 2 dogs greeting each other with the comfortable familiarity of established housemates.
How was your day of reasonably caffeinated legal advocacy?
Productive. 6 client meetings, 2 motion filings, and 1 very satisfying phone call to a landlord who suddenly discovered motivation to address a potentially expensive code violation.
The notorious Washington glare strikes again, even through telephone lines.
We also started organizing information sessions for the neighborhoods adjacent to Monroe Street. Richard's already making offers for the next phase of development.
Leo's expression shifted slightly at the mention of Richard's name, a momentary shadow crossing his features before settling back into his usual thoughtful engagement.
Not surprising. Success tends to accelerate rather than satiate acquisition impulses.
We can't stop him entirely, but we can ensure people understand their rights before signing anything.
The power of informed decision-making. A revolutionary concept in real estate development.
They began walking toward the back of the store, where a small staircase led to the private office and reading room Leo had designed as connection between the commercial space below and their apartment above. The dogs followed, evidently recognizing this path as leading toward dinner and comfortable resting spots.
Did you tell Marcus and Millie about Richard's foundation offer?
No. That particular piece of information seemed best coming from you, if you wanted to share it at all.
The consideration behind this response, his recognition of her autonomy in deciding what to share and with whom, sent a quiet wave of appreciation through Eleanor's system. Leo's consistent respect for her boundaries, his absence of expectation or manipulation, remained one of the most profound differences from her previous relationships.
I'm not hiding it. Just processing what it means that he's still trying to bring me into his fold despite my very public opposition to his methods.
Richard has always appreciated quality, even in his adversaries. Perhaps especially in his adversaries.
They reached the office, a small but well-designed space featuring floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a window overlooking the river. Leo had installed a reading chair angled toward the view, a thoughtful inclusion Eleanor had already claimed as her favorite spot for weekend case review.
You know, there's a certain irony in our current situation.
Just one?
Perhaps several, but I'm focusing on the most aesthetically pleasing example.
He moved to the window, gesturing toward the river with its reflective surface now capturing the lights from buildings along its banks.
3 months ago, we were fighting to preserve something we loved from destruction. We lost that specific battle.
A fact Richard enjoys reminding me of whenever possible.
And yet, here we are, building something new that carries the essential spirit of what was lost. His victory created the conditions for our unexpected evolution.
Eleanor joined him at the window, considering the philosophical framing he'd offered. The defeated attorney in her wanted to argue that evolution necessitated by destruction wasn't true victory. But the woman who had found unexpected purpose in that very defeat recognized the truth in his observation.
You've been reorganizing the philosophy section again, haven't you?
Merely ensuring Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius receive their deserved prominence.
The Stoics would be proud of your resilience perspective.
They'd be equally impressed by your practical response to abstract injustice. Philosophy without action is merely intellectual entertainment.
She leaned against him, allowing herself to fully inhabit this moment of quiet connection. Through the window, She could see the construction site where Monroe Street had once stood. Now the skeletal framework of Richard's luxury development, rising from excavated ground. The physical embodiment of their defeat, of power exercised without regard for community impact. Yet beside it stood Marcus's new flower shop, its vibrant displays visible even from this distance. And here, within arm's reach, the emerging bookstore that would carry forward Leo's vision of literary community, despite Richard's attempted erasure. Down the block, the baker's new location with its expanded kitchen facilities. Diane's smaller but thriving cafe connected to Cornerstone's main space. Not restoration, but reimagination. Not defeat, but redirection.
We should go. They'll be waiting for us at the restaurant.
One moment first.
He turned to face her fully, expression shifting to something more serious, more intent than his usual philosophical ease.
I have something for you. A small commemoration of our 3-month anniversary of shared chaos management.
From his pocket, he produced a small box. Not the jewelry type that might have triggered immediate relationship panic, but a wooden cube with intricate carving on its surface. Eleanor accepted it with curious hands, noting the precise craftsmanship of the sliding panel that served as its opening mechanism.
You remembered our chaotic cohabitation anniversary?
I maintain meticulous records of significant disruptions to previously established life patterns.
The gentle self-mockery in his tone, echoing her own tendency toward precise scheduling and careful planning, drew a smile from Eleanor as she slid open the box. Inside lay a key, modern but attached to an antique brass keychain engraved with a simple C.
The official key to Cornerstone Books and Community. First copy, before even my own.
The simple gift carried weight beyond its physical presence. Symbolic acknowledgement of shared space, shared purpose, shared future being constructed with deliberate intention rather than default continuation of separate paths.
Leo.
You don't have to use it. It's merely symbolic recognition that what we're building here, the store, the legal practice, this life together, has become something I can no longer imagine navigating alone.
The uncharacteristic vulnerability in his voice, the direct acknowledgement of emotional dependence from a man who had once walked away from a lucrative partnership rather than compromise his values. It created a tightness in Eleanor's chest that had nothing to do with anxiety and everything to do with recognition of rare and precious connection.
I was going to wait until after dinner, but...
She reached into her bag, retrieving a small envelope she'd been carrying for 2 days, waiting for the right moment. Inside was a document Leo would immediately recognize, the legal deed to Cornerstone Books and Community, with both their names listed as equal owners.
I had Maria prepare the paperwork last week. It seemed appropriate that what we're building should be officially shared, not just in daily practice, but in legal standing.
Leo accepted the envelope, his expression shifting from surprise to something deeper, more profound as he examined the document within. When he looked up, the emotion in his eyes matched the tightness Eleanor felt in her own chest. Recognition of commitment beyond convenience, of partnership built on deliberate choice rather than circumstance or default.
The precision of your gift-giving puts my symbolic key to shame.
I would argue they're complementary rather than competitive. Key and deed. Access and ownership. Practical application and legal foundation.
Much like their givers.
The simple observation resonated with quiet truth. They had constructed something neither could have created alone. Her precision and his adaptability, her analytical clarity and his philosophical depth, her structured approach and his comfort with uncertainty. Not perfect alignment, but complementary counterpoint, each enhancing rather than diminishing the other.
We should really go. Millie gets cranky when dinner reservations are delayed.
One more thing first.
He set the deed carefully on the desk before turning back to her, hands rising to frame her face with gentle intention. The kiss that followed carried weight beyond physical connection. Gratitude, promise, recognition of something rare and precious being constructed between them with each passing day. When they separated, Eleanor found herself momentarily at a loss for words. A rare occurrence for someone whose professional identity had been built on precise verbal construction. Leo smiled, clearly recognizing and appreciating this uncommon speechlessness.
Now we can go appease Millie's scheduling expectations.
They gathered the dogs, who had settled into patient observation of their humans' emotional exchange. As they descended to the street, Eleanor found herself cataloging the journey that had brought them to this moment, from that first meeting at the dog park to the collapsed building to Richard's development to this new chapter being written along the river. Not the path she had planned or expected. Not the careful, strategic career trajectory she had once mapped with such precision. Not the controlled isolation she had mistaken for independence. The external validation she had confused with success. Something messier, less predictable, more challenging in its emotional demands and unexpected detours. Yet infinitely richer in meaning, in connection, in authentic alignment between values and actions. As they walked toward the restaurant where friends waited, dogs trotting contentedly beside them, Eleanor Washington found herself embracing the uncertainty of this unplanned path. Not because she had suddenly transformed into someone who welcomed chaos, but because she had discovered something worth the risk of its potential cost. A cornerstone upon which something genuine could be built, regardless of what structures might rise or fall around it. Chapter 15, Epilogue, After Hours. The new Cornerstone Books and Community had been open for exactly 3 weeks when Eleanor found herself alone among its shelves after closing time. The evening crowd had departed. The closed sign turned to face the street. The ambient lighting dimmed to a gentle glow that transformed the space from bustling community hub to intimate sanctuary. She had settled into her favorite reading nook, a deep armchair positioned in the far corner where the For When You Need to Escape section met books that changed minds. Wrapped in the soft cashmere sweater Leo had given her just because the previous week, Eleanor had lost track of time as she immersed herself in a novel she'd been meaning to read for months. The quiet of the empty bookstore enveloped her like a physical embrace, broken only by the occasional creak of settling shelves and the distant murmur of the river beyond the windows. In these moments of solitude, surrounded by carefully curated volumes and thoughtfully arranged spaces, Eleanor could fully appreciate the sanctuary Leo had created, not just for customers, but for himself, for her, for the community still finding its balance after Richard's development had altered the neighborhood's landscape. A delicate aroma drifted through the store, drawing Eleanor from her literary absorption. Something rich and savory, with notes of herbs and wine that triggered immediate awareness of how long it had been since lunch. She set her book aside, marking her place with the leather bookmark that had been Leo's first gift to her months ago.
Leo?
No response came, but the scent intensified, suggesting whoever was creating it was moving closer. Eleanor rose from her chair, following the tantalizing aroma toward the small staircase that connected the main store to their private spaces above. Leo appeared at the top of the stairs, silhouetted against the warm light spilling from their apartment. In his hands, he balanced a tray bearing covered dishes, wine glasses, and what appeared to be a small vase containing a single perfect rose.
I was wondering when the literary trance would break. You've been lost in Ishiguro's world for nearly 3 hours.
It could have been 30 minutes for all I noticed. That's the mark of exceptional writing.
He descended the stairs with practiced care, the contents of the tray remaining perfectly stable despite the movement. Eleanor felt a familiar flutter beneath her ribs as she watched him, the fluid grace of his movements, the quiet confidence in his posture, the way his forest green sweater accentuated both his shoulders and the warm undertones in his perpetually disheveled hair.
I was about to implement retrieval protocols. Apollo suggested the aroma-based approach would be most effective.
Wise dog.
He understands the hierarchy of human senses and the power of properly reduced wine sauce to overcome literary absorption.
He moved past her, heading toward the reading nook she had abandoned, his proximity sending a subtle current of awareness across her skin. Months of intimacy had done nothing to diminish this immediate physical response to his presence. If anything, familiarity had deepened, rather than dulled its impact. The tray settled onto the small table beside her armchair, its contents now revealing themselves more clearly. 2 plates covered with silver domes, a bottle of what appeared to be excellent red wine already opened to breathe, proper linen napkins folded with geometric precision that Eleanor recognized as deliberate echo of her own organizational tendencies.
What's the occasion?
Must there be an occasion for serving dinner to the most captivating woman ever to reorganize my filing system?
Flattery noted and appreciated, but suspicion remains.
Leo's smile deepened, the expression creating those small crinkles at the corners of his eyes that Eleanor found unreasonably appealing. He reached for the wine bottle, pouring 2 glasses with the careful attention he brought to all physical tasks.
Perhaps I'm simply seizing an opportunity. The store officially closed. The dogs conveniently exhausted from their afternoon adventure with Maggie. The evening stretching before us without scheduled obligations.
He handed her a glass, their fingers brushing in the exchange. The brief contact sent a current of awareness through Eleanor's system, a preview of possibilities contained in that simple touch.
And perhaps I've been watching you read for the past 20 minutes, completely absorbed in your book, hair falling across your face in that way that makes me want to brush it back. Bottom lip caught between your teeth when you reach a particularly engaging passage.
Heat bloomed across Eleanor's cheeks, not from embarrassment but from recognition of being truly seen, observed with appreciation rather than assessment, with desire rather than evaluation. She took a sip of wine to cover her reaction, finding it rich and complex on her palate.
20 minutes of voyeuristic literary observation?
I prefer appreciative admiration of intellectual engagement. Far more dignified.
He gestured toward the armchair, waiting for Eleanor to reclaim her seat before settling into the matching one adjacent to it. The arrangement created perfect proximity, close enough for intimate conversation, for knees to brush if either shifted slightly, yet with enough separation to fully observe each other across the small table bearing their dinner. With theatrical flourish, Leo removed the silver covers to reveal their meal, perfectly seared scallops atop risotto, surrounded by delicate roasted vegetables arranged with artistic precision. The presentation spoke of careful planning and execution, of attention to aesthetic detail as well as culinary technique.
You made this?
The kitchen may still be recovering from my creative process, but yes.
It's beautiful.
Beauty deserves beauty.
The simple compliment, delivered without calculation or agenda, sent another wave of warmth through Eleanor's system. She had spent years in professional environments where every interaction carried strategic undertones, where compliments served specific purposes beyond their surface meaning. Leo's straightforward appreciation, his ability to express desire and admiration without manipulation or expectation, remained one of his most disarming qualities. They ate in companionable conversation, discussing the day's events at the store, sharing observations about particular customers, debating the merits of Leo's latest reorganization of the philosophy section. The wine disappeared gradually, loosening the edges of Eleanor's usually precise speech patterns, bringing a deeper timbre to Leo's already resonant voice.
How is Mrs. Alvarez's hearing today?
Successful. The judge granted the full rent abatement until repairs are properly completed and inspected. Her landlord was not pleased to see me enter the courtroom.
The notorious Washington legal precision strikes again.
You give me too much credit. The violations were well documented, the law clear. I merely ensured the court recognized both.
The modesty of exceptional talent. Perhaps my favorite of your many contradictions.
Eleanor felt her expression softening, the wine and excellent food creating a pleasant warmth that radiated outward from her core. Leo's gaze held hers across the small table, the appreciation in his eyes underlaid with heat that triggered an answering response low in her abdomen.
Have I mentioned how extraordinary you looked walking into court this morning? That charcoal suit with the subtle pinstripe creates a particular kind of authority that's somehow both intimidating and enthralling.
You might have texted something to that effect.
Words on a screen hardly capture the full impact, especially when you wear your hair up with those few strategic strands escaping. The precision of your appearance combined with those small hints of potential disorder, quite compelling.
Heat bloomed across Eleanor's skin, a flush that had nothing to do with wine, and everything to do with the deliberate appreciation in Leo's gaze. She had spent years constructing her professional appearance for maximum authoritative impact, never considering its potential effect on masculine desire. That Leo found her carefully maintained control appealing rather than intimidating, that he saw the passionate woman beneath the composed exterior, continued to surprise and delight her.
You're unusually focused on my appearance tonight.
Not unusually, merely expressing thoughts typically confined to internal appreciation.
And what prompted this external vocalization?
Leo set down his wine glass, leaning forward slightly in his chair. The movement brought him closer, close enough that Eleanor could distinguish individual flecks of gold in his hazel eyes, close enough to detect the subtle notes of his cologne beneath the lingering sense of dinner.
Perhaps watching you immersed in your book earlier. The complete engagement of your mind, the subtle movements of your body responding to the narrative, a tilt of your head, a quick intake of breath, that slight smile when something resonates. The intellect and emotion in perfect harmony.
The heat in Eleanor's system intensified, spreading upward from her core to bloom across her chest and neck. Professional training had taught her to maintain composure regardless of circumstances, to present a controlled exterior regardless of internal state. But here, with this man in this space they had created together, such armor seemed not just unnecessary but unwanted.
You make ordinary actions sound extraordinary.
Nothing about you is ordinary, Eleanor Washington. Not your mind, not your heart. Certainly not the way you inhabit your remarkable body.
He reached across the small table, fingers brushing against hers in deliberate invitation. Eleanor accepted without hesitation, her hand turning to interlace their fingers with practiced familiarity that did nothing to diminish the current passing between them.
The precision of your movements, the economy of your gestures, the way you telegraph intention through the slightest shift in posture.
His thumb traced small circles against her palm, the simple contact somehow more intimate than their physical proximity would suggest. Eleanor found herself leaning forward, drawn by the gravity of connection between them.
The wine has made you poetic.
Merely lowered inhibitions against expressing observations I make daily.
Such as?
Such as how the particular curve where your neck meets your shoulders seems specifically designed for appreciation. How the slight arch of your eyebrow when you're considering a complex legal question makes focusing on anything else nearly impossible.
Each observation landed with physical impact, creating a tingling awareness that radiated outward from every point he mentioned. Eleanor had never considered herself particularly susceptible to verbal seduction, had dismissed such approaches as unnecessarily circuitous compared to direct communication of intent. Yet Leo's words, his specific, thoughtful appreciation of details others would never notice, created an effect more powerful than any practice technique. This wasn't strategic seduction, but genuine expression, appreciation flowing from observation rather than manipulation.
The dinner, the wine, the unusually detailed compliments. You're seducing me, Leo Bennett.
I prefer to think of it as deliberate romantic escalation, more dignified.
The small smile playing at the corners of his mouth, the warmth in his eyes that mixed tenderness with unmistakable desire. It all combined to send another wave of heat through Eleanor's system. She found herself rising from her chair, moving with deliberate purpose to stand before him, her hand still entwined with his as a physical tether between them.
Your technique is notably effective.
High praise from someone who appreciates efficient methodology.
Looking down at him, Eleanor felt a surge of emotion that transcended simple desire. This man who saw her completely, who appreciated rather than feared her strengths, who recognized the passion beneath her careful composure. He had transformed her understanding of connection, of partnership, of what might be possible between two people who complemented rather than compromised each other. She tugged gently on their joined hands, encouraging him to rise. When he stood, their bodies aligned with natural precision, close enough to share warmth but not yet touching beyond their interlaced fingers. Eleanor reached up with her free hand, fingers tracing the line of his jaw, feeling the slight roughness of evening stubble against her skin.
Have I told you today how remarkable you are?
I believe your exact phrasing this morning involved acceptable coffee preparation skills and adequate dog walking contributions.
A significant understatement of your attributes.
Her hand slid from his jaw to the nape of his neck, fingers threading through the soft hair that curled there. Leo's eyes darkened at the contact, pupils expanding as his gaze remained fixed on her face with unwavering focus.
I'm open to more comprehensive performance evaluation.
The playful response, delivered in that low tone that seemed to resonate directly with the heat building in Eleanor's core, drew her closer. Their bodies connected from chest to thigh, the contact sending currents of awareness across already sensitized nerve endings.
Perhaps we should move this assessment to a more private location.
The famous Washington attention to appropriate procedural environment.
His hands found her waist, fingers splaying against the small of her back in gentle but insistent pressure that eliminated any remaining space between them. The solid warmth of him against her, the subtle flex of muscles beneath his sweater, the controlled strength in his touch, all combined to heighten Eleanor's already heightened awareness. She hadn't intended to kiss him yet, had been planning a strategic retreat to their apartment above. But the proximity, the wine, the hours of quiet appreciation culminating in this moment of perfect connection, it overrode her usual preference for ordered progression. Their lips met with practiced familiarity that did nothing to diminish its impact. Months of intimacy had taught them each other's rhythms, preferences, responses. Yet each encounter retained its capacity to surprise, to create new pathways of pleasure and connection. Leo's arms encircled her fully, drawing her impossible closer as the kiss deepened from greeting to declaration. Eleanor felt herself melting against him, professional composure giving way to the heat building between them. Her hands found their way beneath his sweater, palms pressing against the warm skin of his back, feeling the play of muscles as he responded to her touch.
The store, perhaps not the most appropriate venue.
His voice had roughened, control fraying at the edges in a way Eleanor found deeply satisfying. That she could affect him this way, that her touch could disrupt his philosophical equilibrium, created its own feedback loop of increasing desire.
A valid concern. The apartment seems advisable.
She stepped back slightly, creating minimal space between them without breaking contact entirely. The brief separation allowed momentary cooling of overheated systems, a chance to recalibrate before proceeding. Leo's gaze remained focused on her face, the intensity in his expression triggering another wave of heat through Eleanor's system. His hands hadn't left her waist, thumbs now tracing small circles against her hip bones through the soft fabric of her sweater.
Dinner cleanup can wait until morning.
A surprising stance from someone who appreciates order in shared environments.
Some priorities temporarily supersede organizational principles.
The acknowledgement, his willingness to suspend even deeply held preferences in favor of immediate connection, sent another current through Eleanor's already sensitized system. She reached for his hand, interlacing their fingers once more as she led him toward the staircase. The transition from public to private space, from bookstore to personal domain, created its own anticipatory tension. Each step upward increased the electricity humming between them. Each moment of maintained control, heightening awareness of its impending release. At the apartment door, Leo paused their progress, turning Eleanor to face him with gentle pressure against her shoulders. His gaze traveled over her features with deliberate appreciation, cataloging details others would never notice with the focus that characterized his approach to everything that mattered.
Have I mentioned today how extraordinary you are? Not just your mind or your remarkable professional capabilities, but your...
His hand rose to trace the curve of her cheek, fingers following the line of her jaw with exquisite gentleness.
Your essence, the quality of attention you bring to everything, everyone.
The simple appreciation, offered without calculation or agenda, touched something deeper than physical desire. Eleanor felt her carefully maintained composure softening, emotional barriers lowering in response to this man who saw her completely and found value in every aspect he discovered.
Leo.
Before she could formulate coherent response, his lips found hers again, the contact deeper and more purposeful than before. No tentative exploration, but confident claiming, the kiss embodying months of accumulated knowledge about what pleased her, what transformed ordinary contact into extraordinary connection. Eleanor felt herself responding with matching intensity, months of shared intimacy allowing her to abandon strategic consideration in favor of genuine expression. Her hands found the hem of his sweater, slipping beneath to explore the warm skin and defined muscles of his torso. The contrast of soft fabric and firm flesh created its own sensory pleasure, a tactile confirmation of the strength she'd felt pressed against her moments earlier. They moved through the apartment door without breaking contact, a complicated dance of advancing steps and maintained connection. Leo's fingers found the edge of her sweater, question in his touch as he paused at the boundary. Eleanor responded by raising her arms, invitation clear in the simple gesture. The cashmere slipped over her head, falling forgotten to the floor as Leo's gaze traveled with visible appreciation over newly exposed skin. The heat in his eyes, the focused intensity of his attention, it triggered a flush that spread from Eleanor's cheeks downward, warming skin already sensitized by anticipation.
The precision architect reveals her artistic foundations.
His voice had dropped to that lower register that seemed to resonate directly with the heat building in Eleanor's core. His fingertips traced patterns against her collarbone, each point of contact sending currents through her system with increasing intensity.
Current dynamics suggest inequitable distribution of vulnerability.
The counselor makes a compelling argument.
He stepped back slightly, a momentary separation that allowed him to remove his own sweater in a single fluid movement. The revealing of his torso, the defined muscles of his chest and abdomen, the subtle pattern of hair narrowing toward his waistband, triggered a renewed surge of heat in Eleanor's system. She allowed herself the pleasure of open appreciation, gaze traveling over contours that had become delightfully familiar, yet retained their capacity to affect her breathing, her pulse, her core temperature. Physical response beyond conscious control, body recognizing what mind had already concluded. This man represented perfect compatibility, not just intellectually or emotionally, but physically as well.
Further progression might benefit from adjusted location.
The bedroom?
Precisely.
They moved through the apartment with increasing urgency, path from door to bedroom marked by discarded clothing, shoes abandoned in the hallway, his belt draped over a chair, her skirt creating a pool of fabric just inside the bedroom door. Each revelation of skin, each new point of contact between bodies already heated by anticipation, heightened the electricity building between them. The bedroom welcomed them with familiar comfort. The large bed they had selected together, the reading lamps positioned for optimal individual use without disturbing the other, the photographs of their shared life arranged on bedside tables. A space that reflected both Eleanor's appreciation for order and Leo's comfort with personal expression, neither dominating but both present in harmonious balance. They reached the bed already stripped to essentials, bodies aligned with practiced perfection as they moved together onto the soft surface. Eleanor found herself beneath Leo's solid warmth, his weight supported on forearms positioned on either side of her shoulders. The position created perfect proximity, enough space to maintain eye contact, to continue appreciation of expression and reaction, yet with enough contact to satisfy immediate desire for connection.
You are.
His voice caught, control fraying at the edges in a way Eleanor found deeply satisfying.
Extraordinary, in every particular.
His gaze traveled over her features, down the curve of her throat to the landscape of her body now available for unhindered appreciation. Eleanor felt herself responding to that focused attention, skin warming beneath his gaze with almost physical sensation.
The feeling is entirely mutual.
Her hands found the planes of his back, tracing the definition of muscles that shifted beneath her touch as he maintained his position above her. The controlled strength in his form, the careful balance between weight and restraint, it created its own particular pleasure beyond the obvious physical appeal. Leo lowered himself further, lips finding the sensitive spot just below her ear, that individual exploration had identified as particularly responsive. The contact sent currents through Eleanor's system, back arching slightly in autonomous response that pressed her body more firmly against his. What followed transcended simple physical interaction. Months of shared intimacy had taught them each other's rhythms, preferences, responses, knowledge they now employed with deliberate attention to mutual pleasure. No performance or technique, but genuine connection. Bodies communicating what words sometimes couldn't fully capture. The give and take between them, the balanced exchange of control and surrender, of leading and following, it reflected the partnership they had constructed in all aspects of their shared life. Neither dominating, but both fully engaged, bringing individual strengths to create something neither could have experienced alone. Time suspended its usual progression, minutes or hours passing without conscious tracking as they moved together toward shared conclusion. The outside world receded entirely, attention focused solely on the connection being created and maintained between bodies now operating in perfect synchronicity. When completion finally arrived, it came not as isolated experience, but as shared transformation. Boundaries temporarily dissolved, individual identity momentarily transcended in favor of connection that encompassed both physical sensation and deeper emotional recognition. Afterward, they lay together in comfortable silence, bodies still connected through points of casual contact, her head on his shoulder, his arm wrapped around her waist, legs tangled beneath sheets now considerably less orderly than when they had entered the room. The quiet between them carried no awkwardness or obligation to fill the silence, just comfortable recognition of connection that transcended verbal expression. Leo's fingers traced lazy patterns against Eleanor's shoulder, each point of contact sending small currents through a system still sensitized by recent intensity. She felt her breathing gradually returning to normal rhythm, her heartbeat slowing from its accelerated pace to something closer to baseline function.
Your dinner preparation skills are matched by your other areas of expertise.
High praise from someone who appreciates thorough performance in all domains.
The gentle humor in his tone, the underlying warmth beneath the teasing words, it all combined to create a sense of completion that transcended physical satisfaction. This was what had been missing in Eleanor's carefully constructed former life. Not just intimacy, but genuine connection, partnership that enhanced rather than compromised individual strength.
I have a confession.
That sounds ominous.
Not ominously interesting, more strategically relevant.
Eleanor shifted slightly, raising herself on one elbow to better observe his expression. The movement caused the sheet to slip lower, exposing more skin to the cool air of the bedroom. Leo's gaze tracked the revelation with visible appreciation before returning to her face with more serious focus.
I'm listening.
I may have had ulterior motives for tonight's elaborate dinner setup.
Beyond the obvious culmination we just experienced?
That was hoped for but not presumed.
His expression shifted, something more vulnerable emerging beneath his usual philosophical composure.
I wanted to create a moment worthy of memory, a backdrop appropriate for significance.
Eleanor felt her pulse quickening again, though for reasons distinct from their recent physical activity. Leo's uncharacteristic hesitation, the careful construction of his phrasing, it suggested importance beyond ordinary communication.
I had planned something more structured, a carefully prepared speech, perhaps even note cards.
Note cards?
I know how you appreciate thorough preparation and clear organization.
The consideration behind this thought, his awareness of her preferences, his willingness to adapt his natural approach to accommodate her comfort, touched something deep in Eleanor's chest. A recognition of genuine partnership, of someone who saw her completely and sought to meet her where she was, rather than demanding change to suit his convenience.
But I find myself abandoning structure in favor of simple truth.
He shifted, reaching toward the nightstand drawer with momentary disruption of their comfortable arrangement. When he settled back, a small box rested in his palm. Dark blue velvet, clearly containing jewelry rather than symbolic keys or legal documents.
Eleanor Washington. You reorganized my filing system, my bookstore categories, and eventually my understanding of what might be possible between two people who approach life from fundamentally different starting points.
The box remained closed, his thumb tracing its edge an uncharacteristically nervous gesture. Eleanor found herself holding her breath, all systems suspended in anticipation of what would follow.
I had planned to wait for a more conventionally romantic moment, perhaps by the river at sunset, or during that weekend trip to the mountains next month. But I find conventional timing less compelling than authentic readiness.
He opened the box, revealing a ring that somehow managed to perfectly balance Eleanor's appreciation for clean lines and Leo's more artistic sensibilities. A central stone of unusual cut nestled in a setting that combined geometric precision with subtle organic elements, neither overpowering the other but creating something more interesting than either could have been alone.
I find myself unwilling to imagine a future that doesn't include your remarkable capacity for organization, your precise legal mind, your evolving comfort with unscheduled moments, and your extraordinary presence in my bed.
The simple honesty of his words, free from practiced formula or expected phrasing, touched Eleanor more deeply than elaborate declaration could have. This wasn't performance, but genuine expression, offered without calculation or agenda.
Will you marry me, Eleanor? Continue building this unlikely but remarkably satisfying life together?
Time suspended briefly as Eleanor absorbed the question and its implications. Not from uncertainty about her answer, but from appreciation of the moment itself, the culmination of a journey that had begun with a chance meeting in a dog park, that had developed through collapsed buildings and corporate opposition, and redefined understanding of what constituted success.
Yes.
No qualification or explanation, no careful analysis of potential outcomes or strategic implications. Just simple acceptance of what her heart had recognized long before her methodical mind had fully processed its significance.
Yes?
Were you expecting a more comprehensive response? Perhaps a bulleted list of considerations with supporting documentation?
The teasing question, evidence of her growing comfort with humor in emotional contexts, drew a smile that transformed Leo's features from nervous anticipation to genuine joy. He slipped the ring onto her finger, the weight of it unfamiliar but immediately right, like so much about this unlikely partnership they had constructed together.
I was prepared for at least a 3-page analysis of comparative advantages and potential challenges.
I've found that some questions benefit from immediate rather than exhaustive response.
She leaned forward, sealing this new commitment with a kiss that carried both tenderness and renewed heat. Leo responded immediately, arms encircling her with protective strength that somehow managed to convey security without constraint, support without limitation. When they separated, Eleanor found herself studying the ring, now adorning her finger. The way it caught the subtle light from bedside lamps, the balance of its design that somehow reflected both her preferences and Leo's aesthetic. It embodied the connection they had built. Neither compromising essential self, but both creating something stronger through deliberate partnership.
It's perfect.
Like its wearer in its precision, clarity, and unexpected depths.
The complement, specific rather than generic, thoughtful rather than reflexive, sent another wave of warmth through Eleanor's system. This man who saw her completely, who appreciated rather than feared her strengths, who recognized the passionate woman beneath the composed exterior. He had transformed her understanding of what might be possible in connection with another person.
Apollo and Peanut will need appropriate wedding attire.
Naturally, though I suspect Peanut will object to any costume that limits his freedom of movement.
Strategic treats should ensure compliance.
The easy banter about their shared future, the casual inclusion of their canine companions in life planning, it all contributed to the sense of rightness surrounding this new commitment. Not perfect alignment, but complementary counterpoint, each enhancing rather than diminishing the other. Leo drew her closer, bodies aligning with practiced familiarity that did nothing to diminish its impact. The solid warmth of him against her, the gentle strength in his embrace, the subtle recognition of renewed possibility between them. It all combined to create a moment of perfect balance between satisfaction and anticipation.
I love you, Eleanor Washington. Soon to be Eleanor Washington Bennett, if hyphenation meets with your approval.
The counselor finds this naming convention acceptable.
Her deliberately formal phrasing, delivered with the hint of a smile that belied its serious construction, drew an answering smile from Leo. He recognized the playfulness beneath her structured exterior, the warmth behind her precise expression, just as he had from their earliest encounters, seeing the woman beneath the professional armor when others perceived only careful composition.
And I love you, Leo Bennett. Despite your questionable book categorization systems and philosophical approach to punctuality.
The highest praise possible from someone who alphabetizes her spice rack and color codes her legal briefs.
They settled into comfortable embrace, bodies fitting together with the natural ease that had developed between them. Outside their windows, the river continued its constant flow, a reminder of the world beyond their private sanctuary. Soon they would need to re-engage with that world, with Eleanor's legal practice, with Leo's bookstore, with the community they had helped rebuild after Richard's development had altered its landscape. But for now, in this moment of perfect connection, Eleanor Washington allowed herself to fully inhabit the present without calculating future implications or strategic advantages. Not because she had somehow transformed into someone fundamentally different, but because she had discovered something worth the risk of vulnerability, worth the surrender of rigid control. A cornerstone upon which something genuine had been built, would continue to be built, day by day, choice by choice, with the same careful attention and shared purpose that had brought them to this moment of perfect balance between what had been and what might yet become.